I kind of get into it, I want to understand a little bit more about the profile of the room. So, by show of hands, how many of you have been selling online for over a year? How many for 6 months to a year? How many of you have never sold at all and are looking to get into it? Okay, so most of you have been selling for over a year, and it seems that for the most part, the rest of you are first learning about it to get into it. Okay, so here we are. We're in the digital age, right? Technology is everywhere. The word social, the definition has actually changed, right? And chances are, if I was making a presentation about how to merchandise a retail store, the room wouldn't be probably anywhere near as full. But I got some news for you, and I'm probably going to bust your bubble a little bit. Some things don't change in business, in life, right? So, and this is a very short list, but it's really, really important to keep these things in mind. You like to read these new publications about how we're in the digital economy. The economy is the economy. Yes, it's going in a digital direction. It's changing things. But for example, customers always lead the way. You could look at 1,000 years ago. You could look at 1,000 years into the future. Customers will always lead the way. Customers will tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. If your antenna is up high enough to listen to your customers, which, by the way, that should be a number one priority for you, customers will always lead the way. There's always the battle between the short term and the short term versus the long term. Right? Long term, you want to make investments to build up the business down the line, but we've got to generate some cash flow today. There's sacrifices you're going to make at the expense of the long run, and vice versa. So again, this is something that I don't think will ever change. This battle between the short run and the long run. You are here to provide a valuable service. I don't want to get too far into economic theory, but bottom line, if somebody's willing to pay a price for your product, the assumption is that they believe that what they're paying is more valuable than what you're providing. Otherwise, they wouldn't pay it, right? Hold on to their money. Innovation is always important. You've always got to think about how you can do things better. And by the way, innovation doesn't mean that you have to invent the next iPod. And it's actually interesting to use the iPod as an example. The pieces of the iPod existed before Apple made it. They just brought them all together. And that was their innovation, which catapulted the industry, even though they created nothing new in terms of its parts. So always thinking innovatively, thinking of ways to do things different, although realize that just a little thing can create a quantum leap in the innovation that you bring to the table. Competitive advantages. Especially in this space, I think competitive advantages becomes crucial. Because a lot of people, they come to me, they want to talk about internet, and people have this perception that, oh, everybody's shopping online now. So if I go online, I'm going to do great. And my first question to them is, okay, well, what's your advantage? And I want to give you an interesting stat. Amazon reported earnings a couple of weeks ago. Okay? Anybody know how much revenue Amazon reported for the fourth quarter? Okay, Amazon reported $17.5 billion in revenue. Well, $17.5 billion for the quarter. For the quarter. Okay? Now, who wants to take a guess? How much profit did Amazon see out of $17.5 billion? 187. Okay. So it was about 170 million, right? $170 million profit on 17.5 billion. That means that 17.35 billion was spent on the company. This is what you're competing with. You're competing with powerhouses that have lots of money, billions of dollars, competitive advantages, connections. There's a lot you're competing with. And so my question to you that you've got to answer for yourself, what is my competitive advantage? Don't assume because I'm going online, I'm going to do great. And another stat that's worth keeping in mind, as hot as this whole digital world is, how much of commerce is being done online today? It's about 10%. About 10%. So 90% is still happening in stores. I mean, it's growing quickly. It's growing quickly. But realize, and I mean, the orders get a little muddy because, if somebody, if they research it online, they bought it in the store. If they research it in the store, bought it online. If Intel is making the next, $10 billion deal, I'm telling the guy, you know what? Just type an answer on the computer. Is that online? Is it offline? So it's a little bit muddy. But the point is that a lot is still happening offline. So don't just assume. Again, I'm trying to stay away from stereotypes here, and it's important that you look at the specifics. Yeah.
You mentioned the 17 billion went back into the company.
Yeah.
But how much of it? How much of it was expensive? How much went back as reinvested?
It's a good question, but I actually don't want to get into that now. I'll tell you why. Because a big portion of it is cost of goods, right? But that's also an indication that Amazon says, you know what? I'm willing to lose money on this thing. I'll lose money on it, so long as I beat the other guy. And so I think it stays with the same point, which is this is what you're competing with. You're competing with guys that don't care about making money. So again, it's important to keep this in mind. And again, it's important to stay away from the generalities and get more into the specifics. So again, don't just assume because you're online you can do great. The specifics have to be in line. And again, what brought us here was the competitive advantages. No matter what you do, you've got to know for yourself what your competitive advantage is. So, I got a question for you. When I was first getting into the online space, this was about 12 years ago, and at the time it was much, much smaller. And people close to me, they would come to me and they would say, well, how are you going to sell a piece of clothing through the screen? At the time, you wanted clothing, you walked into a store, you looked at it, you felt it, you tried it on, and you bought it. So now I'm going to turn around and say, well, what are some of the pros and cons of selling from a sales floor versus selling through a screen, or vice versa? All right, so what are the benefits? Or rather, let's start with the cons. What are the cons of selling through a screen? Well, we already said you can't try it on. Yes?
There's a high rate of return.
High rate of return. What are some of the disadvantages of selling through a screen? You can't touch it. You feel it, you can't touch it. Can't try it on. Can't try it on. Shipping is delayed, right?
Pictures are deceiving.
Pictures are not great.
Gratification.
Theft.
Okay, so you're saying the store can upsell while you're there. Okay?
You can't remarket the return.
Say it again.
The return comes back, you can't do anything with it.
Okay, but you have that problem in both cases, right? Both in the store and online.
Yeah, they can always lock it down in the store.
Right, and you can have well, I think what you're trying to say is you can have higher returns online versus a store, right? Because the store, they'll see it doesn't fit right, they just won't buy it, right?
The human factor.
Okay, the human factor.
That will succeed because they have that return policy that people
Right. Okay, so now let's get into the pros now of selling through a screen.
Volume.
So what are some of the benefits?
Low overhead. Low overhead.
Okay, that's an assumption. That's an assumption. Okay.
You open
Open to the world. Okay. 24/7. Okay.
You present a much larger product.
You can present more products. Okay.
You don't have to go to buy them now.
Okay, so you can shop while naked at 1 in the morning, right? Okay. That's a pro or a con. Okay. No, by the way, I say that because with credit card processing, especially online, there's fraud, and you're paying 100%, right, to the processor.
But in the store, you have that.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, big.
Anything else?
The picture is very good.
Okay, so you can have actually great presentation online, right? Okay.
You probably don't have to stock merchandise.
Oh, that's a great point. That's a great point. So you don't have to stock it, right? Right. Okay. Okay.
Whatever you look at their blouses, if you look at their clothing, you're gonna, oh, it's easy, I'll have it all shipped together.
Okay, so a bundled purchase. Okay.
Also, the linking between sites means you can get referred from another store to yours.
So new marketing methods.
Okay.
Sales tax, great point. Great point. Okay, so we've established that there are many benefits. There are many benefits with selling online through a screen, right? So we need a lot of benefits in store, and then we have a lot of benefits online. And as it turns out, I think you guys missed probably what is the biggest benefit.
Bigger audience.
You can capture information and use it over and over and over again.
Okay. I don't know if you're cheating on that.
No, no.
Again. So one of the biggest advantages you have online is you have loads and loads and loads of data. A store doesn't know how many times this product was touched. We don't know how many people tried it on and didn't buy it. We don't know how many people got to the register and chose, you know what, I'm going to leave now. I'm just not going to buy this. Online, we have it all. If a person walks into your store, I don't know where he came from. I don't know how long he's been on the street for. How do I know what ad brought them in? Online, you have it all. You have all of this information. So really the first thing I want to talk about with selling online is the power of data. You have tons and tons of information. You have customer information. You know where people are coming from. You know where they're, you can compare countries or cities or zip codes that have the highest traffic with the lowest conversion. Why is that zip code? People aren't buying them. Maybe our shipping policy isn't good enough. We know how many products are being viewed the most and shopped the least. We have product data. Tons and tons of product data. We can see customers' browsing patterns. The amount of information you've got online is endless. The key is, you've got to realize that's a huge advantage. You've got to take advantage of that. You've got to take advantage of that. Now, I think it's a little bit, I think it falls a little short. If I was to come up here and say, look, your pictures should be 3 inches by 4 inches. Or you have to have a video on every single product page. Or your navigation should be 1 inch wide, 5 inches, 1 inch tall, 5 inches wide, and it's got to be on the top left. You know what? If you're selling shoes, depending on the type of shoe that it is, you might have one scenario. If you're selling cameras, you might have a different scenario. And the key with succeeding online, and I would say succeeding anywhere, but online that you have the tools at your disposal, is testing. You've got to test. You've got to constantly test. Always seeing what works and what doesn't. And then when you do testing, you've got actual results. But I think sometimes more important than the actual results are the trends. So the result might have fallen short of where I wanted it to be. But it might be more successful than I expected because the trend is shooting up. And on the contrary, the result may be better than you expected, but if the trend is down, then you're going in the wrong direction. So now, so I guess the reason why to me this is so important from the beginning is because if you are first selling online, if you're getting into it, even if you're new to the game, one question you've got to ask is, well, am I set up to test? And by the way, there are ways of doing sophisticated tests, and there are ways of doing very basic tests. The one thing that I've seen all too common when people start websites is they go out and they hire a company, okay, build me a website. Okay, great. Now the website's built. Okay, where are the sales? I'm like, oh, I'm like, wait, and I'm looking at the screen, I'm like, I would try putting this there and that there, and I would change that blue to red. Really? I didn't pay the guy for that. Well, you should have. Your first, and I think this applies to almost any business, your first step out is just bait. You're throwing it out and you're seeing if the dogs come. They may come, they may not. And by the way, if they do come, you might have got more. So you've got to be prepared to try many different things and shuffle things around and continuously test. And by the way, testing doesn't just apply to the site itself, it applies to marketing. So for example, we send out emails. We send out sometimes 12 different variations of an email. Sometimes one letter difference in the subject line leads to a 10% difference in click-through rate and conversion. There are ways to test everything. Don't assume you know best. As brilliant as you are, don't assume you know best. Test. Again, we come back to tenet number 1. Customers will lead you in the right direction. Test. So what are the types of things you would test? So you've got paid real estate. So you've got a scenario where you've got, above the fold, below the fold. You could be on the top left, top right. You could have items right in the middle, right? So the way you lay out your page real estate, that's one thing you test. Product sequence. You might have a scenario where this item, you might find the top line, third item, that's the top spot. That's what will get the most sales. But again, you want to test this variation, right? The same product, put it in the first spot versus the third spot, what's the difference?
You're looking for.
Well, again, don't assume what the customer wants to do. Let the customer tell you. Look, there's a fine line. Because on the one hand, and this is a very famous Steve Jobs quote, he's like, look, I don't wait for customers to tell me, what they want. I show them what they want, right? But he's fudging it a little bit, right? Because when he put out the first iPod, it took off. So he says, people like iPods, so he made more of them. So now he came out with 20 different iPods, right? And then when the iPhone worked, he said, I'm going to create an iPod that looks just like an iPhone because people love the iPhone. So realize that even in scenarios like that, the greatest companies capitalize on what customers tell them they like. Treat yourself like one of these top companies. Let customers tell you what works. With photography, same story. On our site, we went through this whole debacle because when we first started, at first we only showed things on mannequins. And then we said, it will look so much better on a model. So we had the model and we showed the whole face, this, that, the other. And then years later we said, the faces is too much, taking away from the product. And we said, guys, I don't want to hear your opinions anymore. Let's test it. So we took the same products, same model, one showing the face, one not showing the face. And it seems that without the face works better. So now we do more shots without the face. What's that? Have a face, right? So that's something that you can try testing. And by the way, so now you can enhance the site with all sorts of zooming capabilities and videos and so on and so on. Does it work? Is it worth it? It might cost you $100,000 to do it. Is it worth it? Test it. See how much better you do with this scenario. Product descriptions. This is pretty much minuscule, so I don't know how helpful it is to actually look at it. But we have over here a screenshot of Metaphor, who I think does a great job with their product descriptions. Again, I don't know how useful it is, but they actually have 3 different tabs with 2 different types of information. Look, these people, they're selling, I don't know, I think their average sales is about $1,000 or whatever it is, so they need to have a lot of this description. But, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but another thing you've got to realize, and the reason why testing becomes so important, the online world, your online presence, unlike a store, where you have that personability, right? So if somebody's walking into my store, I can treat each person differently. And I can see, this person likes this type of item, I can talk to them this way, right? And that person, they like another style, so I can talk to them another way. Online, it's very systematic. Everybody's seeing the same thing, for the most part, right? So to get it done right, it pays off hugely. And if you do it wrong, you get nailed. You pretty much get nailed because everybody's seeing that wrong sequence. Pricing. I think people often overlook this detail, and I think now more than ever, pricing is huge. And especially now, it's not just what the actual price is, but it's how you promote the pricing. So we're living in a coupon crazy world, right? I think between the guilds and the Groupons and what, you name it, everybody's looking for a coupon, right? So you may find that if you take an item that was $100 and you make it $80, it does only half as good compared to an item that was $100 with 20% off coupon. But don't assume you know better. Test it. Display methods, we mentioned that a little bit. So video is becoming very popular now, I think, for good reason. I think especially in terms of this gap that separates the retail versus the online world, video really does kind of close that. And in fact, I think provides more information than you might even get in the store. So I think video is something that, personally, for myself, I'll say that we're not as far along as I would like us to be. But, I think video display is something that's worth testing, and I think it's quite valuable. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you say tested, this sounds like you have, Apple has an unlimited budget.
Right.
Some are starting the business doesn't. That's the first question. The second question is there a way of kind of getting best practices? In other words, seeing what someone else is doing versus you having to test something that somebody very well may have tested?
Right.
So these are kind of two questions I'm asking. Are those both available?
Okay, so a couple. So we have a we just bought a software package that helps you test, and it's expensive, right? So if you're starting a business, you wouldn't spend that kind of money for this type of thing. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because sometimes when you go into things with a certain mentality, right, you set things up. It doesn't cost you anything more, but you set things up in such a way that you can do certain things. So as I said before, so now instead of hiring a company to just build it out, you're going to pay them $20,000 on the spot. You tell them, no, let's do a different kind of deal. I'm going to pay you $15,000 for this type of site, and then I'm going to pay you $1,000 for the next 6 months because I'm going to need to change things. So you're really not spending more, but you're actually getting what you need.
Is that really doable? 5 tests at $1,000.
Okay. So then there's another thing. So now when he's building out the site, you tell him, you know what? I need to be able to change some things myself. That's what I need. That's what's important to me. And by the way, I would say that's probably the most important thing. You want flexibility in being able to change the site around. It's really, really important. And by the way, your tests don't have to be, A, B, C, D, multivariant testing. It could be that, you know what, on one page we're going to show, a listing of brands right in the middle, and then the other one we're going to have a search box right in the middle. We'll see which does better. I don't think, look, there is more sophisticated testing than others. I don't think you need to get too sophisticated, but I think you need to, the point really is that you need to be prepared to be flexible. And if you're not building that flexibility, you're behind the eight ball. It's going to hurt you. Sure. And in terms of best practices, I don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you. Because I'm willing to bet, first of all, I think every business is different. And what was best practice last month, I think has changed this month, frankly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's a tough one. But maybe as we go along, I'll kind of address some of that.
If you sell on eBay or Amazon, they have analytics that you can use as part of their store, the Amazon store, and just know how to read it.
Well said. Well said. So really, look, at the end of the day, you could be the CEO of GE, right? You could have unlimited resources, but your job is to make good use of resources. That's what you're supposed to be doing. That's what the definition of the economy is making use of resources. So I think when there's a will, there's a way. But I think you also need to understand how important these things are. Because a lot of people say, oh, analytics, this number thing, I scrap, I don't really get it. Well, you got to get it. If you can't get numbers and read trends and graphs, this is probably not the business for you. Because I'm telling you, it's all data driven. All data driven. So get used to it. And by the way, you'll find that it's wonderful because now instead of making decisions, from the seat of your pants, you're actually making, you're making substantial decisions with real information. Yeah.
That way you can test like your homepage, we're getting 2 alternate versions.
I believe Google does have.
Google Analytics.
Well, there's Google Analytics, but they also do provide software for testing that's very inexpensive.
So one thing, we actually have a class in 2 weeks from now about Google Analytics. It's a double course. And to answer your question, yes, there's a Google Optimizer tool, which allows you to change different color buttons on a specific page and actually weed out the color buttons that do not work. There's other other variations of testing that you can do with every page or with an entire site.
So now, I think as we're talking about all this different type of testing, it becomes a little bit daunting, and it's like, all right, so if I'm testing, a million different things, when do I finally land? I'd like to kind of draw an analogy between imagine you have a stock portfolio, right? So you have the bulk of your money in things that you pretty much know what they're going to do. Either they're safe or you understand the company well. At least, I hope you should. You shouldn't just invest blindly and just hope for the best. You should know what to expect from the bulk of your money, and then you might have a certain portion, maybe 10%, maybe 20%. But you know what? This is what I play around with. And I believe that approach makes a lot of sense with this type of testing as well. I think once you conduct the first few tests and you see what works best, that's your baseline. And that's what you want to stick to primarily. But at the same time, don't ever assume that you've got the formula down and that you leave the testing. So you always want to have a certain portion that's kind of a sandbox that you're playing around. So again, a portfolio approach. Once you kind of have measurement of results and trends. Ideally, when you're deciding, well, what should I be testing, you should narrow it down to what is the most important, right? So if you go to Amazon, they basically make it very clear as to what is the most important thing. There's really three things here. If you notice that they actually have double categorization here. So they have a drop down with all departments, and then they have their top departments right there on the left hand side. It's the same product selection. When Amazon's saying, look, I don't want you missing this. Whatever you do, I do not want you getting lost and not knowing where to find books on my site. So they give it to you twice. And frankly, I know Richard was saying that you don't want to show things twice. I think it's a little bit nuanced. I think for the most important thing, you show it twice in different places because you don't want people to miss it. And by the way, people are going to look at the screen and we have people asking us, sending us emails, saying, I love your site, but how come I can't shop? It's like, what? The whole site is shopping. But people miss the most basic things. Don't assume that you're the customer. Let the customer show you who the customer is. So again, Amazon, trust me, Amazon is a very good reason for having the same departments in two different places very close to each other because people miss it and they don't want you missing it. So I think it's important to determine what is the most important thing and just know that you have your bases covered. And it's okay to double categorize in different ways, but the most important thing to make sure that it's not missed. With Amazon, you'll see here, I don't know if it applies to every business, but Amazon, their search box is pretty important. I mean, it's Amazon, I don't know, I think the stats are the same, but Amazon will claim that the bulk of their sales come from people doing searches, right? For us, we don't find the same thing. We do find, however, that people that conduct searches convert much better. But is it because they know what they want, they're converting higher, or is it because when people are using a search engine, it throws them into more relevant product and they end up on it. So those are the types of things we play around with where, if we threw them into the search engine on our site, are they more likely to buy? Right? But the point here is, determine what is the most important thing. And by the way, I think it's good practice in business in general. In life in general. You should always know what the top two priorities are. When people come to me with a whole plan, they want to do they want to change, I tell them, okay, take the plan back. Come back to me with 2 lines. The 2 most important things that you want to get done. And just let's focus there. Because when you're focusing on everything, you focus on nothing. So it's important to narrow it down. What is the highest priority for this website? And be sure that the customer is not missing it. And then, of course, moving on, the holy grail is one-to-one selling. And that brings us back to the initial point, which is the power of information. You have the ability to sell, digitally, one-on-one, because you know exactly what that customer likes. And I'm sure you guys, are in the same boat as me. You'll be browsing on Amazon, and then 8 hours later, you're getting emails about the items that you just saw. Providing you sales, oh, this goes well with that, and then they'll hit you up a week later, this type of thing, right? Amazon, they're pioneering this method of one-to-one selling, and the beautiful thing is that, as the industry matures, the technology gets less and less expensive. And so we're going to talk about technology a little later on because I know it comes back to this question, which is, look, I'm first starting my business, I'm on Amazon. How am I going to achieve one-to-one selling? And I'm not saying you have to achieve one-to-one selling. But I think it comes back to the point, which is you've got tons of data and you want to structure yourself in a way that's flexible to capitalize on that data. Does that make sense? Good. So again, this is my personal page from Amazon. Although I believe that, obviously Amazon determines this is the most important thing, right? That's straight dead center. Amazon's obviously making a big bet on the Kindle, the Kindle Fire. Gives them a method to sell you continuously more products. So that's a very strategic move on their part. Some books, some apps. Apparently my wife was looking at some jewelry. Again, realize that the holy grail is one-to-one selling, which again is driven by the customer. I keep coming back to the same model because again it's so important to recognize. Again, as brilliant as you are, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, you all know what you're doing. You realize that even the smartest people in business realize that the customers will tell them what's most important.
So this one-to-one, it's not just on what they purchase, but even anything they browse.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. You'll find. Again, I think just use Amazon as an example. Browse around, and you'll see that one-to-one. It's not just on the site; it's on the site. It's an email, and I'm sure you're all seeing this now as well. You'll leave Amazon or you'll leave Zappos, and you'll be on CNN, and then an ad comes up with products you just looked at on their site, right? Right. So this one-to-one, and by the way, doing something like that is not even expensive. You can do this through Google. I mean, there's also on advertising, but you can do this through Google advertising and saying, you can say, I want to track people that have been through my site, I want to follow them, and I want to hit them up with ads. So this whole idea of personalizing, again, you can go from 0 to 60, but to get from 0 to 20 really could be almost virtually costless. I mean, the tools are out there. I think it's important that you got to look out for it and realize how important this is. But yeah, so it's browsing, it's shopping, it's all the above.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I know it's following me, but I already know that site, why do they want to follow me? I know to go to Guild, right? And now Guild followed me to Drudge Report.
Right.
It's right there on top.
Right. So what's the question?
I already know the site. I'm not going to go click it on. I just bought from them.
Okay. You know what? I'm glad you asked that question because I want to again frame things in the context of life. Okay. So how many ads do we look at per day? I think the number's like 10,000. It's something ridiculous. It's something ridiculous. Can I tell you the differences we see, and it's mind-boggling. If our shopping cart is 0.5 of a second slower, it can have a negative impact up to 10%. And you would say, but they're buying, so they have to wait an extra second. What's the big deal? It is a big deal. Because you might be shopping, you might be very conscious when you're shopping. But some dude may be shopping on the train. And when he goes under the underpass, you lost him. That's when the second comes in. And by the way, mobile shopping is probably the fastest growing trend in online shopping. Okay? You don't know people are shopping while they're watching TV, while they're in the movies. People are shopping in ways that you would not imagine. And again, I come back to the point. Don't assume everybody's you. Do not assume everybody is you. Look at what the data is telling you.
They're shopping while they're in stores too.
They're shopping while they're in stores. They have their mother online screaming at them, and they're shopping on. You don't know what's going on in people's lives, in people's households, and when they're shopping. And so now we're getting. How are we doing on time? Perfect. Okay. Because all right. So, and I want to come back to kind of the first point, which as much as things are changing, a lot of things are staying the same. So merchandising online in many ways, it's not unlike traditional retail. It's not. So you have your winners and you have your losers. And I don't care. And by the way, you know, I recommend you try testing things. You try merchandising things. But at the end of the day, you're going to have products that nobody wants to buy. Or they don't want to buy it at that price. You're going to have to hit price. You have to try promotion, right? And I would suggest you try different things to see what works. But this concept, I mean, especially in my business, I mean, we're selling, you know, we carry 20,000 styles at any given time, you know, and no matter what, at any given time, you know, you're going to have 20% that are home runs, you're going to have the 20% that are dogs that you have to continuously mark down, right? Or provide special promotions on, whatever it is. So again, this concept of winners and losers, again, in terms of, and it's not just products, it could be a certain spot on the page, just doesn't work. For whatever reason, for this product, for this type of site, people don't go there. So again, you know, sometimes I think, you know, one thing you got to be careful of in any business is not to get too emotional. Because sometimes, you know, you invested so much in a product, and I bought this thing, I love it, it's great, it's the best, blah, blah, blah. You put it out and nobody's buying it. And then you put it front and center the way Amazon put it back to people, and nobody's buying it. And then you spruce up the pictures and nobody's buying it. At the end of the day, nobody wants it at that price. Get over it. And I think it's actually it's a really important concept because I think people hang on to things too long sometimes. If it's not working, I mean, look, it's you know, in many cases it's not a marriage. If the product doesn't sell, move it out, move on. Get the next great product, free up that cash, and buy something that will work. So, you know, another aspect that just doesn't change is this aspect of reporting. And I think it's really important to keep this in mind, even from the very beginning stages, because I'm telling you, if you're not set up with reporting capabilities, you're going to be lost. You're really going to be lost. I mean, God willing, you have enough volume where you can't keep track of it with a notepad, you know? Reporting it's hugely important. If you don't have reporting, you can be flying blind, and that's how you crash. So, for example, with merchandise, you have merchandise sell-through reports. Right? So you want to know how many you received, when you received it, how many you sold. How much did you sell it for? What was your cost on those items that sold? And I probably should have put that on paper because it was actually, even if you're a drop shipper. Well, if you're a drop shipper, your cost of goods on hand is zero. So it becomes, look, if you're a drop shipper, and by the way, you know, when people first get into the business, I recommend they try and drop ship as much as you can, because you know it's so much less inventory risk, right? So I think you're going to generate different tax reports. You're not worried about so much, you know, versus what you have on hand. But now it becomes a question of opportunity cost, right? So you might have, you know, your top sellers, right? You might make less money on them, whereas items that actually make a lot of money on, you might want to position them differently because you might want to, you know, capitalize on those. So I think depending on your scenario, you might want to be looking at data for different purposes. You know, you're always looking at how you can maximize it. So I think that's how it plays like that. So again, you have things like merchandise margin, and again, you know, going into it, if you're not going to have reporting going into it, you might want to pause to make sure you got it. Because without the right reporting, you won't know what's working, you won't know what's selling, and you will find yourself pretty much guaranteed. And then there's, you know, about what we discussed before, you've got, you know, analytics, so where you can see conversion rates, so on and so forth. You know, it's, again, these are things, so for example, Google has Google Analytics. At Google Analytics, it's free. I mean, Google wants all this information, so it's given you for free, right? When you're building things out, when you're in the early stages, even if you've already started, it's important that you have these things integrated. If you don't have them integrated, get them integrated. It's hugely important. We spoke about the systematic nature of things, so I just kind of wanted to give you an example. So, for example, with Zappos, you know, look, they're showing you the first 3 things on Zappos.com on the header. Number 1 is shoes, number 2 is clothing, number 3 is bags. Because they want everybody coming to that store, because people are looking for shoes first, so that's going to be first. They're making a major push towards clothing. My bet is because they figure that it's got high margins, better shipping scenarios, and then there's bags that need to be scenarios. They want everybody to know that there's free shipping, free returns, free 365-day return policy, 20% of customer service, and of course, happiness. So you see, by the way, there's an example of I wouldn't call, well, I guess it is navigation. So there's 365-day returns here, it's over here, the free shipping, it's over there. And on the top, they say if you order clothing by 1 o'clock PST, then it's free next day business. Free next day business shipping. They want everybody to know that. If you're coming to Zappos, you will not miss that it's free shipping, and clothing gets free overnight shipping, and there's free returns, and we're giving you happiness. They don't want anybody missing that. Again, it's very systematic. Online, if you get it right, you do pretty well. If you get it wrong, you find yourself in good sense. And again, very systematic. So I want to take 2 minutes to talk about technology and technology capabilities, because again, this question was asked. I mean, with many things that I'm talking about, you need the technology to actually get these things done. And the question is, well, you know, look, if I'm not, you know, I don't have $10 million to start up, I'm first starting a business, I'm on a free budget, how do I make these things happen? And again, I think that if you recognize that these types of capabilities are important, you'll figure out a way to get at least some of it, so that you can do some of these things, right? And again, I think, again, this comes back to the short term versus the long term. And this happens to everybody. I don't care how much money you have, how big of a company you are. There are always things that you want to do in the long term that you can't do right now. That's life. Right? You've got to make do with what you've got today so you can build up more so that long term you'll have more. Right? So, you know, we can talk about this all night. But I guess the point that I want to get across is, you know, I think you always got to straddle, you know, the short term against the long term and realize that they're not the same thing, and you've got to take care of what you got to do today, and don't be discouraged if you don't have everything you want, right? Just know that you'll get there, but set your sights on it. Because, by the way, there are people that don't look at the long term at all. So I'm doing what I'm going to do today in the story. And then 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, they're still in the same spot because they didn't set things up strategically for the long term. And then you have people that have the reverse. They're only looking at the long term, and the long term never comes because they're not doing what they need to do today to generate the cash flow or whatever it is to get there. So really, both are really important, and I think especially with technology, that scenario really applies. And then there's something that I call technology myopia, where, you know, people feel like, oh, I hired the best programmer, the best company, I spent $1 million, I got this, I got that, my site's awesome. And it's like, the customer doesn't know what you spent. The customer doesn't care what you spent. The customer wants their lives made easier. The visitor wants to be a happy customer. So don't get caught up, and just because it's cool and it's technological and it's whiz bang and it's flash, and don't get too crazy with that. Again, let the customers tell you what's important. And don't assume because you got the coolest thing, you spent the most money, you got the best programmer, and you know, whatever it is, that the technology is actually useful. Because something that's cool and something that's useful is actually very, very different. So keep in mind, again, the usefulness of what you're doing. And that's it. So I hope that was helpful, not too, you know, out there and things that you can apply every day. So any other questions? Yeah.
I noticed a lot of websites now using QR codes even on the website.
He's asking about QR codes and what the advantage is of having them on the website itself. QR code is that those are a barcode that you find kind of printed. You know, look, I guess I guess that there's a way to use, you know, a number of gimmicks to kind of suck people in. It's hard for me to generalize. In that regard, I mean, I haven't seen this scenario. But it depends on what they're doing. I mean, if they're trying to just capture customer information, you know, that can be something that they may find to be traditionally useful. So I think it depends on the scenario. Yeah.
Testing software you
Rafi was mentioning that it's a Google.
No. You said you had purchased some testing software.
We use something called Monotape.
Can it be leased or only purchased?
We lease it, but we pay about 10-15 grand a month for this thing. And there's a setup fee as well. And I don't know if these guys, I don't know if they do deals for like $1,000 a month. I don't know if they do, but
Similar to a sandbox environment, or goes beyond that?
It allows you to test different objects on the screen, and then it delivers results, and it could change based on the results of the test. It could actually change what shows up in that spot on its own. Yeah. I mean, look, it's funny because once you start testing, there's so many things you can test, and then sometimes you're testing so many things that you're not going with anything that's really successful. And that's why I think it's got to come back to this portfolio scenario where you're putting the bulk of what you know is going to be best, and you're testing in terms of priorities. That's what we have to do. Yeah.
As you said before, when things come after more expensive, over time they go down.
Right.
Years ago, you set up a website and 10 grand and more for a simple website.
Right.
Now you probably set it up for a couple of grand or whatever. I'm not talking about a mega business. But then there's these things that you hear all the time, guys in India or whatever, that'll do it for $100.
Right.
And then there's things that you can set up your own, I guess through eBay, Amazon, or whatever. Do you recommend that as long as you follow these kind of things, or are they a waste of time?
I think so.
To get started,
So the question is, when you're getting started, which route should you go? Should you pay a company to build it out for you? Should you go with one of these online template scenarios? Should you hire a programmer in India? I think it depends on the resources. If you've got $10 million in the bank, right, and you want to come out strong, look, so I'll take an extreme example. If Walmart is coming out of the gate, they want to compete with Amazon, right? They're coming out big. They have that big dollars, big results to show, a lot of inventory. They're not messing around, right? What I recommend to people first getting into it, because I find that in the beginning, most of what you're going to be doing in the beginning is learning. You're not even going to be making money. You're probably going to be losing money. So I recommend that people that are first starting out, that don't have decent budgets, to actually start out with, even if you sold on eBay, even if you sold on Amazon, even if you went with one of these templated sites that charges $100 a month, I recommend you start there just to learn the business and see what works, see what doesn't. Again, it comes back to the spirit of testing. So you're learning the business, see what works, see what doesn't, and now you're finding, you know what? Now I see what types of products I can sell. If only I had a shopping cart that had this extra aspect that makes it smoother, I could do 10% better. See, so when you're first starting out, I recommend you learn, because you could spend 10 million or 10,000 or 1,000. Both ways, the first 6 months, you're going to be learning. I'd rather you learn spending less money. And then when you've learned some things, you've recognized your competitive advantage. Now's when you start investing more. Because now you know what you're doing. You don't want to spend big money, you don't know what you're doing.
You use the word competitive advantage.
Yep.
These are products you're selling. I work in unique products myself. I get patents on certain things. So over here you're describing unique advantages. I'm selling a shoe.
Right.
Outside of great delivery.
I'll give you a great example. Okay. The post office, as we know it, has existed for how long?
for 100 years.
Okay. I think the idea of parcel delivery has existed for maybe 1,000 years. It's been a long time. Okay. The post office, as you know it today, has existed for about 100 years. And what's the difference? It used to be that you wanted to deliver something to someone. You sent it to the post office, they delivered it, and now when they brought it to the person's door, they paid for it, right? So now, if it came from, the other side of the country, it came to the person's door, and they said, I'm not paying for this, I don't want it. So most people never paid, and they did the work anyway, right? So then about 100 years ago, they changed and said, you know what, we're going to go with a flat fee, and the person sending pays. And when it's going to be much cheaper. Because now people are going to send things much more often. And wouldn't you know, it worked. I mean, aside from the past few years where the post office was really messed up, I mean, it worked. For many decades, it worked beautifully. It was the same service. It was the same everything. But they just changed how they charge people. And it made all the difference in the world. So my point in that long-winded answer is that it doesn't mean that you have to have a completely different concept and it doesn't have to be everything. It could be that the way you price is different. It could be that the way you ship is different. It could be, it could be that I mean, look, you mentioned that you have the parents and certain items, so on and so forth. I mean, if you have an item that other people don't carry, that's within itself, that's a competitive advantage. People don't have the products that you're selling. Maybe your way of bundling is unique. Where you're selling two products together. Maybe your sense of customer service is different. Maybe because in the beginning you're going to be really small, you're personally going to call each customer, see how the shoe fit, and maybe you're going to send them something that's worth $10 as a follow-up, and that makes you unique. It doesn't have to be changing the world. It could be something really small, but that makes you different.
Okay,
You had a question? Yeah.
Last question. So.
Okay.
So it's kind of a specific question. So most of what you're saying in terms of analytics is understanding what the user wants based on what they're actually doing.
Right.
One of the trends that you see is that there's that feedback button on the side, and it's kind of more prominent than it ever was in the history of the internet, where it's always there and you can leave feedback. Back to Steve Jobs, but do people know what they want, and how much should you listen to that as opposed to what they're actually doing?
Look, if everything was the formula, if success was a formula, everybody would be following the formula, everybody would be successful, right? But it doesn't really work that way because there are nuances. And so I think that, as with anything, it's a balance. I think on the one hand, you need to do some things to customers, and at the same time, you do need to collect feedback. And I think that, look, there's no law which states the feedback that you get, you must listen to. And by the way, you'll find you get they'll get feedback, and people will say, "Oh, I love the site, the products, but everything should be 50% cheaper." Okay, very nice. But you don't do things for the things that you can use. You do it for the few things that you actually can use. So if people are saying, oh, you'll find, and it's really wild. I mean, if you look at the Wikipedia phenomenon, people will spend months and devote their lives doing things for free where they have no benefit, and they'll be providing information. And you might find that people provide and they'll spend a lot of time drafting documents and giving you tons of information for free. And a lot of it could actually be useful. A lot of it could actually be useful. And I do think that, look, again, I gave the Apple example, and don't be fooled. Steve Jobs and Apple, they take into account what customers are telling them. And by the way, customers speak in many different ways, many different ways. A sales report is a communication from the customer telling you what they like, what they don't like, right? So the customer is always speaking. And look, my general theory is, more information is always better. You've got to filter it. You don't want to be bombarded with information, but you always want to know more than less. I think it's the simple side. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.